How are y'all? Good. So in February, my RDO and my friend, Tanya Johnson, asked if I would be willing to tell you my story. And all I could think was the most Southern phrase imaginable. Bless their heart. They must be struggling to find somebody to speak. Now, if you know what that means, then you know, right? As I considered what she asked me to speak about, I considered the environment. I considered the team. Most importantly, I considered the dentist and what he built. I considered what a culture was. You see, a culture is just an experience that leaves an impression, usually in the way you feel. I thought about the best way to leave that impression. Recently, I was told by a very important COO that I was a good storyteller, that I could paint a picture that would leave an impression. I decided it would be an honor to tell you my story, to paint you a picture of the culture that was built 20 years before I needed it, and how that culture supported me through one of the hardest times in my life. As I take you through the next few minutes, I want you to relax, get comfortable in your chair, and listen as I paint you a picture of being cared for by culture. Are you ready? June 27th, 2022 would end as one of the hardest days in my life. The day started out as it always does. I get to spend the day quarterbacking an amazing team of 18 staff members, 4 dentists, treating over 100 patients. It's always an amazing day, getting to love on every single soul. Unfortunately, unbeknownst to the people around me, I was playing phone tag with my doctor. You see, he had insisted I go for my very first mammogram. He was firm that at 41, I had put it off long enough. Not to mention, he felt 2 lumps at my checkup. In the month of June, I went to my first mammogram, my first ultrasound, and ultimately, my first biopsy. So on the 27th of June, I was waiting for those results. At 4:07 p.m., I slipped out the back door to the sidewalk and made my third and final attempt to call him back. Thankfully, I reached him, but then I could hear him saying, "I am so sorry." The buzz in my ears became a roar, slowly getting louder as I sank to my knees on the sidewalk. He told me I had breast cancer. The next few minutes are unclear. I remember hanging up with my doctor and calling one of my closest friends. As I sobbed into the phone, she texted her sister. Her sister is Dr. Ashley Holliday, or Sosh, as I affectionately call her. Sosh was doing dentistry upstairs. You see, she is one of 4 amazing dentists at Cullman. She dropped what she was doing and she came to the sidewalk. She knelt behind me and she hugged me. In just a few short minutes, I saw his shadow come over the top of us. Dr. Jonathan Eccles, or Superman, as I like to say, dropped what he was doing and came to be with us. They picked me up, put me in Sasha's car, and Sash drove me home. As I reflect on that day, I think back to the sidewalk, this sidewalk, and how it was built 20 years before I needed it and would become the foundation for the Cullman culture. You see, that culture that began 20 years before would become a support system for me as I battled through the next 6 months of my life. The Cullman culture is an environment with an amazing team and an even more amazing set of doctors who focus on loving people every single day. My diagnosis that day was impacted because of our culture. What's your culture? How does your culture impact you and the people around you? As I think back to how that culture was built, the first thing I consider is the environment. Environments are intentional. The space around you isn't created accidentally. If you don't like your environment, sometimes you get the start over. It's what you do with the start over that counts. Picture this. It's April 2011. North Alabama is slammed by a massive outbreak of tornadoes. I remember that day because I was in Decatur, 25 miles north of the city of Cullman. I left the dental office I was working at to go home and wait out the storms. I had no idea how my life would be impacted that day by a tornado that blew through Cullman. It's funny how significant moments you don't even know about will change your life. On that day, Superman was in his basement at his home. Dr. Eccles was waiting on the storm when he saw an aerial shot of devastation near his office. When it was safe, he jumped in his truck and drove towards the office building. The closer he got, the debris in the road made it harder to drive. He parked 5 blocks from his office and he began to walk. Then in a panic, he began to run. He ran until he got to the sidewalk, my sidewalk, the sidewalk that I needed 10 years later. It was all that was left. He sank to his knees in complete shock because the building was gone. It would become one of the most pivotal moments in his life. For in that moment, he met the man who would become instrumental in designing the Cullman environment, Joel Leonard, or Architect Joel, as I like to call him, walked over from his home 2 blocks away and stood with Dr. Eccles as he surveyed what was left. Together, they would begin building back better. Dr. Eccles conveyed his vision for what comfort looked like in a dental office. Architect Joel brought that vision to life. This key piece to the Cullman culture was brought about by a chance meeting after one of the hardest times in Superman's life. This key ingredient would bring comfort to me. My favorite space in the office is what I lovingly call my peace space. It's the fireplace. Most mornings before my day, you can find me sitting in front of the fireplace, answering emails or talking to staff. Because Dr. Eccles was able to see past the hardship and realize his dream of his culture, I got the benefit of a comfort space. The environment of home means so much. During that 6 months, I spent my days at peace in an environment meant to give it. I recognized the vision Superman built. The environment of home was comfort to me. Environment is one piece of that puzzle in creating your culture. Superman realized every detail was a touch point. People still say, 10 years later, how comfortable they feel when they walk in the door. It's home. Devastation brought home. The start over brought home. It was a second home for me. You may not get the chance to start over, but you get the choice to create an environment. You all do. Whether it's rebuilding an entire office or designing your individual space, be intentional. Set the tone. Make an impression. I want to preface this next story by telling you it's my favorite. I want to take you to a muggy, sweaty Alabama day. It's the kind of day that sweat rolls down your back just by standing on the sidewalk. On a sunny day in July 2004, resident mama was born. Now, you must be asking, how is a mama born? Such a funny statement, but it's true. My resident mama, the core of my support team, was born 16 years before I needed her. She is a spunky 72-year-old Southern lady. She has been in dentistry longer than I have been alive. She describes that day in detail. It was the day she met the dentist she would spend the last half of her career with. She remembers peeking out the window of the office, anxious to meet the man who purchased the practice she loved. True to Cullman fashion, a truck pulls into the parking lot. And in that moment, she describes him as a 14-year-old boy. He looked young, and in her mind, she could be his mama. Nancy, my resident mama, was his resident mama first. She embodies the spirit of Cullman. She sets the tone for the office and the staff and how they treat and love people every single day. Nancy was an assistant, but now she manages the lab. She knows everything and everybody in Cullman County. When she walks down the hall, she does not pass a patient she does not know. She stops to hug each patient and greet them as if she's known them her whole life. Resident mama took care of me. She always made sure I had plenty to eat and drink, chased me to make sure I'd not overdone it, and conveyed wisdom over my tough decisions because she herself battled breast cancer 10 years before. She knows I love Tootsie Rolls. Such an odd thing, but Nancy knows the smallest details. One day, in particular, I was comforting a patient in the hallway. They were concerned over their dental needs. They were crying. I was consoling. I remember Nancy walking by and touching the pocket of my scrub pants. She ever so gently pushed something into my pocket, looked up at me with a grin, winked, and said, "This is for later," and she was gone. The treasure in my pocket was 2 Tootsie Rolls. The treasure in my heart was Nancy. She gets it. She understands that the smallest things are the biggest things in someone's day. She understands that dental care can be overwhelming to patients and busy for staff. She brings the element of comfort to everyone she meets in that office, whether it's a staff member or a patient. She makes everyone's day brighter just by walking in the door. Nancy embodies the ingredient of the Cullman culture. That's Nancy. The second most important ingredient is the people that the leadership surrounds themselves with. Do you have a resident mama, or are you the resident mama? If you are in leadership, are you smart enough to hire a resident mama? Or maybe, as a 14-year-old dentist who would eventually become Superman, you are smart enough to keep your resident mama. For this next picture, I want to take you to May 2020. You know where you were. You remember the great dental shutdown of COVID. I remember vividly walking into Cullman. I knew about this office. I'd seen the Cribs video. I'd been there 5 years before just to visit. The office was beautiful. I thought that day in May, I was walking into a job interview. I didn't realize I was walking into a job offer. I sat dumbfounded in what would eventually be my office as the office manager asked if I would like a tour. I remember walking down the hall that day with a flurry of activity going on around me. We approached the end of the hall to a quiet corner with a window. Operatory 5. Inside Op 5 was Superman. Picture him, masked, gloved, and wearing a face shield. He has this way of looking up from his patient while you stand in the doorway. It's kind of a cross-eyed look. Shh, don't tell him. He doesn't smile, he is focused. In that moment, I remember saying the dumbest thing you could ever say to a dentist in front of a patient. "Oh, you are wearing a face shield. I guess you started that with COVID," I said. "Nope, I've always worn one," he said, and promptly turned back to his patient. He says he remembers that moment. He doesn't. I remember two things about that moment. The sheer focus and drive he had while in the dental chair, and the support around him. You see, the leadership is the key to the whole idea of culture. Leadership, the single most important ingredient in any culture. Leadership, by definition, commands the ship. I used to think leadership meant authority, meant control. Listen to this truth. The best leadership is found in helping people reach their potential. Find the potential in your team and give them the tools they need to succeed. You see, he couldn't micromanage that day. He couldn't control the interactions in each room and do the dentistry in Op 5. He made a choice long before that moment. He chose to find the potential in the people he surrounded himself with and let them handle what he couldn't. He chose to let them do it better. Make no mistake, his choices were intentional. He chose what his culture would look like. It was a culture of loving his staff that would translate into loving each other and ultimately his patients. I'm living proof that this culture and this village of people exist because they became my village and they became my people. They became part of my family. And for a brief moment, I forgot that. Remember in the beginning, I told you that unbeknownst to the people around me, I was playing phone tag with my doctor? I was so busy supporting them that I hid that I needed support. In fact, I waited a week before I told them about my diagnosis. I hid from my village. The final picture I want to paint is in July of 2022. We hold meetings every Wednesday morning in the consult room. It's a kitchen. We converted it to a consult room because we needed space. It's the place we all meet to catch up. At 6:50 that morning, I let him tell my village. I couldn't do it. I couldn't say it. And I wasn't ready to admit it. He was my rock that morning, and usually he will tell you I'm his. His quiet strength gave me a sense of peace. I needed his leadership. As he told the team, I scanned the room. I could see each face. These were the people I was in the trenches with every day. People I loved. First, I saw Stephanie, my Steph. The woman who could command the front desk with her eyes closed and her hands tied behind her back. From the minute I met her, we clicked. She spoke my language. She was crying. Next, I saw Tanya, the hygienist that was visibly deflated when he announced that I was practice manager because of all the changes. She was visibly deflated again, and this time it was because I was sick. One by one, I saw each of the 18 faces, my village, my people. I saw their worry, and I felt their concern. Superman asked for prayer. My village circled around me as he petitioned God for favor. I remember thinking in that moment, I have already found favor. God loved me enough to give me this moment with these people in an environment under Superman's leadership. My motto verse is Isaiah 58:11. I chose it the week I took over at Cullman as practice manager. It simply says, where God guides, God provides. Long before he knew I would need it, God provided this culture. He provided this environment, these people, and that leadership. in a moment that was meant for me. It was a culture that cared for me.